The great crystal throne room fell silent as Empress Lyrelai raised her hand. Around her, the 12 members of her war council stood with heads bowed. Their blue skin looked pale under the dying light that filtered through the massive windows. Outside, the sky burned orange from the enemy ships that circled their world like hungry wolves. General Vextar stepped forward, his armor scratched and dented from the morning's battle. "My Empress, we have lost another defense station, the A. Cortax will reach the capital city within 3 days. Lyrelai closed her ancient eyes. She had ruled the Zephyrian Empire for 800 years. She had seen her people spread across 12 star systems, building cities that touched the clouds and ships that sailed between the stars. Now only 3 worlds remained, and even those were under attack. "How many ships do we have left?" she asked. 47 battle cruisers and maybe 200 smaller vessels, Vextar replied. His voice was heavy with defeat. "The Corthax have over 1,000 ships in this system alone." The Empress looked at her council. These were the best minds of her empire, generals and scientists who had served her family for generations, yet none of them had found a way to stop the Corthac collective. The enemy was too strong, too many, too ruthless. "There is one option." "We have not discussed," said Minister Calthon, the oldest member of the council. His voice shook as he spoke. "The humans." A murmur ran through the room. Some council members looked shocked, others disgusted. Humans were a young race, barely 300 years into space travel. They controlled only a few dozen worlds and had no great empire like the Zephyrians once had. "The humans?" General Vextar laughed bitterly. "What could those primitives do that we cannot?" Minister Calthon held up a data crystal. "They have something we lack, General. They win wars they should lose. Look at their history. They fight each other constantly, and somehow they get stronger from it. They have new ideas about warfare that no other species has thought of." Empress Lyrelai took the crystal and inserted it into her throne's data reader. Images flowed across the holographic display above them. Human battles from their home world, their colonial wars, their fights against other alien races who had attacked them first. "They are clever," she admitted. "But they are also young and weak. What good is cleverness against 1,000 enemy ships?" "Perhaps that is exactly what we need," Calthon said quietly. "We have tried strength against strength and failed. Maybe it is time to try something different." The Empress studied the data for a long time. The humans did fight strangely. They used tricks and deception. They attacked supply lines instead of fighting head-on. They made their enemies angry, and then used that anger against them. It was not honorable warfare as the Zephyrians understood it, but it seemed to work. "Even if we wanted their help," General Vextar said, "why would they give it? We have nothing to offer them except a losing war." "We have knowledge," the Empress replied. "Technology they do not possess. Star charts of regions they have never explored. And we have something else they might want: revenge against the Corthax." She was right about that. The Corthac collective had attacked human colonies twice in the past 50 years. Both times the humans had driven them back, but not without losing many lives. There was no love lost between humans and Corthax. "Send the message," Empress Lyrelai commanded. "Tell the humans we need their help. Tell them we offer them full partnership in whatever remains of our empire after this war ends." Minister Calthon bowed. "And if they refuse?" The Empress looked out at the burning sky. "Then we die with honor, as our ancestors did. But if they accept—" She paused, thinking of the strange human tactics she had seen in the data. "Perhaps we die a different way. Perhaps we live." 3 days later, the human response came. It was not what anyone expected. Captain Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the Earth cruiser Destiny as it dropped out of hyperspace near the Zephyrian capital world. He was a tall man with brown hair and calm eyes that seemed to see everything at once. At 34, he was young for a commander, but his reputation preceded him. Morrison was known throughout the Earth Defense Force as a tactical genius who thought outside the box. "Sir," his communications officer called out, "we're receiving a transmission from the surface. The Zephyrians want to know where the rest of our fleet is." Morrison smiled slightly. Tell them this is it. One ship, one crew, one strategic advisor. The bridge crew looked at each other with concern. They had expected to escort a diplomatic mission, not conduct a one-man war consultation. Admiral Lisa Parker, who commanded the small human task force, stepped beside Morrison. Are you sure about this, Jake? The Empress is expecting an army. That's exactly why this might work, Morrison replied, studying the tactical display that showed Korthak ships surrounding the planet. She's thinking like every other military. Commander in the galaxy. More ships, more guns, more soldiers. Sometimes the solution isn't to fight harder. Sometimes it's to fight smarter. The shuttle that took Morrison to the surface was escorted by 6 Zephyrian fighters. As they descended, through the atmosphere, he could see the damage from the orbital bombardment. Cities lay in ruins, and massive defense installations had been reduced to twisted metal and broken stone. The landing pad was surrounded by Zephyrian soldiers in full battle armor. They were impressive beings, tall and graceful with their blue skin and silver eyes. But Morrison could see the defeat in their posture, the way they held their weapons like they had already given up. General Vextar met him at the shuttle door. The Zephyrian general looked Morrison up and down with obvious disappointment. You are the human army we were promised? I'm Commander Jake Morrison, Earth Defense Force Strategic Planning Division, Morrison replied calmly. And no, I'm not an army. I'm something better. Better? Vextar's voice carried disbelief. 1 human against 1,000 Korthak ships? Morrison looked up at the sky where enemy vessels moved like dark clouds. General, has anyone ever told you that sometimes the pen is mightier than the sword? Vextar's universal translator struggled with the human phrase. I do not understand. You will, Morrison said with quiet confidence. Take me to your Empress. We have a war to win. As they walked toward the palace, Morrison was already analyzing everything he saw. The defensive positions were too predictable. The troop movements followed standard patterns that any military academy graduate could counter. The Zephyrians were fighting a war from a textbook, and their enemies had read the same book. It was time to write a new chapter. Commander Jake Morrison sat in the vast library of the Zephyrian Palace, surrounded by data crystals and holographic displays. For 3 days, he had been studying every battle report, every tactical analysis, and every military doctrine the Zephyrians possessed. The more he read, the more he understood why they were losing. Empress Lirelei entered the library with General Vextar close behind. She moved with the grace of someone who had ruled for centuries, but Morrison could see the weight of defeat in her silver eyes. Commander Morrison, she said, settling into a chair across from him. My generals tell me you have requested access to our most classified military files. Why do you need to know our ancient battle traditions? Morrison looked up from a hologram, showing a recent space battle. Your Majesty, I've been studying your war records for 72 hours straight. Do you want to know what I've found? Please, she replied, though her voice suggested she expected bad news. Morrison stood and activated a large display screen. Battle formations appeared in the air between them, showing Zephyrian ships arranged in perfect geometric patterns. You fight like artists, he said simply. General Vextar bristled. We fight with honor and precision. Our formations have been perfected over thousands of years. And that's exactly the problem, Morrison replied without anger. Look at this battle from last month. He highlighted the engagement where 50 Zephyrian ships had faced 70 Korthak vessels. Your ships form the traditional Diamond of Victory formation. It's beautiful, it's ceremonial, and it's completely predictable. The Empress leaned forward. Explain. Morrison manipulated the display to show the battle from different angles. The Korthaks knew exactly what you would do because you always do the same thing. They positioned their ships to exploit the weak points in your formation. They targeted your command ship first because it always flies in the center. They attacked your flanks because your diamond formation leaves them exposed. These formations have brought us victory for millennia, Vextar protested. Against enemies who fought the same way you do, Morrison said. The Korthax don't follow your rules. They don't care about honor or tradition. They care about winning. He changed the display to show a different battle. Look at this engagement. Your ships maintained perfect formation even as the enemy was destroying them. Your captains died beautifully, but they died. Empress Lyrali studied the tactical display with growing understanding. You're saying our strength has become our weakness? Exactly, Morrison nodded. In war, predictability is death. If your enemy knows what you're going to do, they can counter it. The Korthax have been fighting you for 3 years. They know your playbook by heart. General Vextar crossed his arms. Then what do you suggest? That we abandon thousands of years of military tradition? Morrison smiled slightly. I suggest you learn some new tricks. He activated his personal communicator, sending a signal to the human ship in orbit. I've asked my people to send down some training materials. Basic, human military doctrine from the past few centuries. Human doctrine? The general's voice carried clear skepticism. What could a species that's barely left their home system teach us about warfare? Survival, Morrison said quietly. Humans have been fighting each other for thousands of years. We've had to learn how to win against superior numbers, better technology, and stronger enemies. We've learned that the side that adapts fastest usually wins. The Empress gestured for him to continue. Show us. Morrison called up another display, this one showing human military history. On Earth, we have a saying, all warfare is based on deception. This comes from an ancient human military philosopher named Sun Tzu. The idea is simple. Make your enemy think you're going to do one thing, then do something completely different. Showed them a human battle from their colonial wars. Here, a human fleet of 30 ships defeated an alien force of 80 vessels. How? They pretended to retreat, drew the enemy into an asteroid field, then used the asteroids for cover while they picked off the alien ships one by one. That's dishonest, Vextar said. That's effective, Morrison replied. The goal of war isn't to fight fairly. It's to protect your people and defeat your enemies. Everything else is secondary. Empress Lyrale was quiet for a long moment. You're asking us to change everything we are. No, Morrison said gently. I'm asking you to add new tools to your arsenal. Keep your honor, keep your traditions, but don't let them get your people killed. There's no honor in extinction. Over the next week, Morrison worked with a small group of Zephyrian officers to develop new tactics. Captain Ryan Brooks, his aide back on Earth, sent detailed analysis of human military strategies through quantum communication. The first lesson was simple. Break the patterns. Instead of flying in formation, Morrison explained to a group of ship captains, try flying in seemingly random groups. Make the enemy guess where you're going to be. Use different approach vectors for every attack. The Zephyrian officers looked uncomfortable with these ideas, but desperation was a powerful teacher. When Morrison suggested they test his theories, in a small engagement, Empress Lyrali gave her approval. The test came when Korthax scouts were detected near the system's outer planets. Instead of sending a traditional patrol in diamond formation, Morrison convinced General Vexitar to try something different. 6 Zephyrian ships approached the enemy scouts in what appeared to be a confused, unorganized manner. The Korthax, expecting a formal challenge, moved to intercept in their standard attack formation. Instead of meeting them head-on, the Zephyrian ships scattered in different directions. The Korthax followed, trying to engage each ship individually. What they didn't realize was that the scattering was planned. Each Zephyrian ship led its pursuers toward a predetermined point where the others were waiting in ambush. Within minutes, all 12 Korthax scouts were destroyed without a single Zephyrian loss. General Vextar stared at the battle report in amazement. How did you know they would follow? Because that's what I would have done if I was thinking like them, Morrison replied. They expected you to fight honorably, so they planned to counter an honorable attack. When you did something unexpected, their plans fell apart. Word of the victory spread quickly through the Zephyrian fleet. For the first time in months, there was hope in the eyes of the soldiers and sailors. Maybe these human ideas weren't so crazy after all, but Morrison knew this was just the beginning. The small victory would make the Korthax more cautious, more ready for tricks. He needed to stay ahead of them, to keep innovating and adapting. He sat in his quarters that night composing reports for Earth Command. Morrison reflected on the challenge ahead. He had gotten the Zephyrians to win one small battle, but winning a war was entirely different. The Korthax were smart and ruthless. They would learn from this defeat and adapt their own tactics. The real test was yet to come. The success of the first battle had changed everything. Word spread through the Zephyrian fleet like wildfire. Soldiers who had been preparing to die with honor were now talking about living with victory. But Commander Morrison knew that winning one small fight was very different from winning a war. He stood in the palace war room with Empress Lyrale and her senior commanders, studying a map of the star system. Red markers showed Korthak positions, blue ones showed Zephyrian forces. There was far too much red and not nearly enough blue. The enemy has begun moving differently, General Vextar reported. They're no longer sending small scout groups. They're keeping their ships together in large formations. Morrison nodded. They learned from our ambush. Now they're being more careful. He pointed to a cluster of red markers near the mining planet of Kepler 7. But being careful can be a weakness too. Look at this formation. They're so worried about being ambushed that they've grouped everything together. Prince Zalthar, the Empress's young nephew, leaned forward to study the display. Unlike the older commanders, he had embraced Morrison's new ideas with enthusiasm. What are you thinking, Commander? I'm thinking it's time to teach them that concentrated forces make better targets, Morrison replied. He activated his communicator. Lieutenant Sam Davis, this is Morrison. Are you ready for Phase 2? The voice that came back was crisp and professional. Ready and waiting, sir. The stealth ship arrived 2 hours ago with the equipment you requested. Morrison turned to the Zephyrian commanders. We're going to try something your people have never done before. We're going to attack their supply lines. General Vextar frowned. Supply lines, but there's no honor in attacking cargo ships and fuel transports. There's also no honor in watching your people starve because enemy fleets can refuel and rearm while yours cannot, Morrison replied firmly. War isn't about honor anymore, General. It's about survival. Empress Lyrale raised her hand before Vextar could argue. Explain your plan, Commander. Morrison highlighted several routes on the star map. The Korthax need fuel, food, ammunition, and spare parts just like we do. These supply convoys travel on predictable routes between their forward bases and their home systems. If we can cut off those supplies, their big fleets become useless. But attacking supply ships, another commander protested. It's not proper warfare. Proper warfare is getting your people killed, Morrison said, his voice harder than usual. I've studied 3 years of your battle reports. Do you know what I found? Every time you fought properly, you've lost. Every time you've done something unexpected, you've won. Prince Zalthar spoke up. The commander is right. We can't afford to worry about proper warfare when our species faces extinction. Over. The next week, Morrison worked with Lieutenant Davis and engineer Kate Williams, who had arrived on the stealth ship with specialized equipment. They trained small groups of Zephyrian soldiers in what humans called guerrilla warfare, hit-and-run tactics, sabotage, and psychological operations. The first target was a Korthax supply depot on the edge of the system. Traditional Zephyrian tactics would have called for a direct assault with maximum force. Instead, Morrison planned something different. A single Zephyrian cargo ship, apparently damaged and drifting, sent out a distress signal near the depot. When Korthax ships moved to investigate, they found the cargo ship filled with refugees fleeing the war. The Korthax brought the ship to their depot for processing, just as Morrison had predicted. What they didn't know was that the refugees were actually Zephyrian Special Forces soldiers, and the cargo ship's hold contained enough explosives to level a city block. The explosion destroyed the entire supply depot and 3 Korthax ships. But more importantly, it sent a message. Nowhere was safe and nothing was predictable anymore. The reaction from the Zephyrian military was mixed. Some officers praised the tactical brilliance. Others were horrified by the deception involved. Used civilian refugees as cover, General Vextar said during a heated council meeting. We disguised soldiers as innocent people. This goes against everything we believe. Everything you believe has been getting you killed, Morrison replied. How many real refugees have died because you wouldn't bend your rules to save them? Empressy. Lyreley watched the argument with tired eyes. Commander Morrison, I understand the necessity of your tactics, but my people are struggling with these changes. Some are saying we're becoming as ruthless as our enemies. Morrison was quiet for a moment. Your Majesty, I've been thinking about that too. There's a difference between being ruthless and being effective. We're not killing innocent people or torturing prisoners. We're using deception and surprise to level the playing field. But where does it end? Asked Minister Calthon, the elderly council member who had first suggested contacting the humans. If we abandon all our principles to win, what are we really saving? Before Morrison could answer, alarms began blaring throughout the palace. A communications officer rushed into the room. Your Majesty, we're receiving reports from across the system. The Korthax are launching simultaneous attacks on all our remaining worlds. The main display showed the tactical situation. Hundreds of enemy ships were moving towards Zephyrian positions. It was the largest offensive the Korthax had ever attempted. They're trying to end the war quickly, Morrison realized. Our attacks on their supply lines have forced them to use everything they have before they run out of fuel and ammunition. General Vextar looked at the overwhelming enemy numbers. We can't fight all of them at once. Our forces are spread too thin. Then we don't fight them all at once, Morrison said, his mind already working on the problem. We make them think we're going to fight them, then we do something completely different. Prince Zalthar stepped forward. What do you need from us, Commander? Morrison looked around the room at the faces watching him. These people had trusted him with their survival, and now everything depended on the next few hours. I need every ship you have, even the damaged ones. I need volunteers for a mission that will probably get them killed. And I need you to trust me one more time. You have it, Empress Lyreley said without hesitation. As the Zephyrian commanders rushed to implement Morrison's desperate plan, the human strategist stood alone in the war room, staring at the tactical display. The next battle would determine whether his unconventional methods could work on a massive scale, or whether he had simply delayed the inevitable. Outside the palace windows, the first explosions lit up the night sky as Korthax ships entered orbit. The final test of human strategy against alien might was about to begin. Morrison picked up his communicator and spoke to his team on Earth. This is Morrison. If this doesn't work, make sure Command knows we tried something new. Maybe the next strategist will learn from our mistakes. He closed the communication and turned back to the battle display. There was work to do, and very little time to do it. The Korthax fleet filled the space around the Zephyrian capital world like a swarm of angry insects. Over 800 enemy ships had arrived in the past 6 hours, more than the Zephyrians had ever faced at one time. On the surface, air raid, sirens wailed as civilians rushed to underground shelters. Commander Morrison stood in the palace command center, watching the tactical displays with growing concern. His unconventional strategies had worked well in small battles, but this was different. The sheer number of enemy ships made traditional tactics impossible, and guerrilla warfare nearly useless. Report, Empress Lyreley commanded as she entered the room. Her usual calm was cracking under the pressure of seeing her empire's final moments approaching. General Vextar looked up from his console. All our remaining fleets are in position, but the numbers are overwhelming. We have 130 ships against their 800. Even with the new tactics, we cannot win a direct battle. Morrison studied the enemy formation. Something bothered him about it, but he couldn't put his finger on what. Have the Korthax changed their usual attack patterns? Lieutenant Sam Davis, who had been monitoring enemy communications, looked up from her station. Actually, yes, sir. They're using formations we've never seen before. Very tight, very coordinated. It's almost like they're copying someone else's tactics. A cold feeling settled in Morrison's stomach. Show me their formation analysis from the past week. The main display changed to show Korthax ship movements over the last several days. Morrison's fears were confirmed. They're using human military doctrine, he said quietly. Prince Zalthar, who had been learning to read tactical displays, frowned. What do you mean? Look at this formation. Morrison pointed to the enemy ships arranged in a complex pattern. That's a modified version of the Earth Navy's strike group formation. And this maneuver here, that's from Human Colonial War Tactics, Chapter 7. The room fell silent as everyone understood what this meant. The Korthax had been studying human military strategy, learning from Morrison's own victories against them. How is that possible? Empress Lyrelai asked. Engineer Kate Williams, who had been working on captured Korthak technology, spoke up from her corner workstation. Ma'am, I've been analyzing their communication systems. They've been recording all our battles and sending the data back to their command ships. If they have access to human military databases, they know everything we're going to do before we do it, Morrison finished. They've turned my own methods against us. The tactical situation became clear. Every strategy Morrison had taught the Zephyrians was now known to the enemy. Every surprise attack, every deception, every unconventional tactic had been studied and countered. Sir, reported Captain Ryan Brooks through the quantum communication link from Earth, we're detecting massive enemy reinforcements jumping into the system. Estimate another 400 ships. Morrison closed his eyes. 1,200 Korthak. Ships against 130 Zephyrian vessels. It wasn't just overwhelming, it was impossible. Commander, Empress Lyrelai said softly, is there anything in your human military history that covers this situation? Morrison looked at her, thinking of all the Earth battles where desperate forces had faced impossible odds. Actually, yes. There's an old human saying, when you can't win the game, change the rules. Over the next hour, Morrison worked frantically with his team to develop something completely new. Not tactics from human military doctrine, not strategies from Zephyrian tradition, but something that had never been tried before. The enemy expects us to either fight them directly or use hit-and-run tactics, he explained to the assembled commanders. So we're going to do neither. We're going to make them fight themselves. General Vextar shook his head. I don't understand. Morrison activated a new display showing the Korthak fleet formation. Look at how tightly packed they are. Over 1,200 ships in a relatively small area of space. What happens if something goes wrong in the middle of that formation? Lieutenant Davis caught on first. Chain reaction. If ships start exploding, in the center the debris and energy blast would damage other ships around them. Exactly, Morrison nodded. But we need to make it look like an accident, not an attack. If they realize what we're doing, they'll spread out and we'll lose our chance. The plan was desperate and required perfect timing. Using their remaining stealth ships, small Zephyrian teams would infiltrate the Korthak formation and plant devices on their fuel storage systems. But not bombs. That would be too obvious. Instead, they would use what Engineer Williams called cascade failure inducers. Tiny devices that would cause the enemy ship's own fuel systems to overload and explode, but only after a time delay, and only when the ships were under stress from combat operations. It will look like their own equipment is failing, Williams explained. Fuel system explosions happen in battle. They won't realize it's sabotage until it's too late. The infiltration took 18 hours. Zephyrian special forces, trained by Morrison in human stealth techniques, slipped through the enemy formation in modified cargo pods that registered as space debris on Korthak sensors. One by one, they attached the devices to enemy ships and escaped. When the Korthaks finally began their attack on the planet, Morrison was ready. The enemy fleet advanced in perfect formation, their ships coordinated like a single massive organism. The Zephyrian forces moved to meet them, appearing to use traditional defensive tactics. The battle began exactly as the Korthaks expected. Zephyrian ships formed up in defensive positions around the planet, while the enemy advanced. Energy weapons lit up space as the two fleets engaged. Then the first Korthak fuel explosion occurred. A ship in the middle of their formation suddenly erupted in a ball of fire, its fuel tanks overloading under the stress of constant firing. The explosion damaged 3 nearby ships. The Korthak commanders barely noticed. Fuel explosions were common, in battle. The second explosion came 5 minutes later, then a third, then 6 more in rapid succession. Now the enemy began to worry. Their tight formation, perfect for coordinated attacks, became a death trap. Each explosion damaged more ships, creating debris fields that caused more accidents and more explosions. "Sir," reported Davis, "the enemy formation is breaking apart. They're trying to spread out, but the explosions are happening faster than they can move." Morrison watched the tactical display with grim satisfaction. "How many enemy ships have we lost them?" "Over 200 destroyed, another 100 damaged and retreating." It was working. The Korthak fleet was tearing itself apart from the inside, and their commanders still didn't understand what was happening. But Morrison knew this victory came with a price. When the enemy finally figured out what had happened, they would never trust their own equipment again. They would change everything about how they fought, making them even more dangerous. "Commander," Prince Zalthar said quietly, "what happens when they realize what we did?" Morrison looked at the young Zephyrian prince, thinking of all the escalating moves and counter-moves that would follow this battle. "Then we'll have to get even more creative. War is like that. Both sides keep adapting until one side can't adapt anymore." The battle raged on, but for the first time in years, the Zephyrians were winning. The question was whether they could win fast enough before the enemy learned to counter this new form of warfare too. The Korthak fleet was in chaos. Over 300 of their ships had been destroyed or damaged by the cascade explosions, and their perfect formation had collapsed into scattered groups trying to avoid the debris fields. But Commander Morrison knew the victory wouldn't last long. "Sir," Lieutenant Davis reported from her console, "we're detecting new transmissions from the enemy command ship. They've figured out what happened." Morrison nodded grimly. He had expected this. The Korthaks were too smart to fall for the same trick twice. "What are they doing?" "All remaining ships are spreading out and running full diagnostics on their fuel systems. They're also jamming all communications to prevent further infiltration." General Vextar looked up from the tactical display. "We've destroyed nearly half their fleet. Shouldn't they retreat?" "Not the Korthaks," Morrison replied. "They don't retreat. They adapt." He studied the enemy positions with growing concern. "They still outnumber us 2-1, and now they're angry." Empress Lyrelai entered the command center looking exhausted. The battle had been raging for 12 hours, and the strain showed on everyone's faces. "Commander Morrison, our scouts report that more Korthak ships are arriving from their home systems. Fresh reinforcements." Morrison felt the weight of responsibility settle on his shoulders. He had bought them time and inflicted heavy casualties, but the enemy could replace their losses. The Zephyrians could not. "How long until the reinforcements arrive?" he asked. 6 hours, Prince Zalthar answered. "Maybe 7 if we're lucky." Morrison looked around the command center at the faces watching him. These people had trusted him with everything, and he had given them hope when they had none. But hope wasn't enough anymore. They needed a miracle. "Sir?" Engineer Williams called out. "I'm reading something strange from the captured Korthak command ship we've been studying. There's a massive power surge in their communication array." Morrison turned to her workstation. "Show me." The display revealed energy readings from the disabled Korthak vessel they had captured weeks earlier. The ship's main computer was still active, apparently trying to send a signal to the enemy fleet. "It's been doing this for 3 days, Williams explained, "ever since the big battle started. I thought it was just system damage, but the pattern is too regular." Morrison studied the data. "It's not random. This is a coded transmission." He called up his communication link to Earth. "Captain Brooks, I need a favor. Can you run this signal pattern through our code-breaking computers?" The response came back within minutes. "Commander, this isn't a communication signal, it's a command protocol. The ship is trying to transmit override codes to other Korthak vessels." Suddenly, Morrison understood. "Williams, can you access the ship's central computer?" "I've been trying for weeks, but their security is too advanced." "What if we don't break their security?" Morrison said, his mind racing. "What if we use it?" Lieutenant Davis looked confused. "Sir?" Morrison turned to face the group. "The Korthaks have been studying our tactics and adapting to counter them, but they made one mistake. They assume we think like they do. He activated the main tactical display. Every species in the galaxy fights the same basic way. Take territory, destroy enemy ships, protect your own forces. But humans learned something different during our early wars. Sometimes the best way to win is to convince your enemy to defeat themselves. General Vextar frowned. I don't understand. Psychological warfare, Morrison explained. The Korthax pride themselves on their coordination and discipline. Their entire military structure depends on following orders without question. What happens if we can disrupt that? Engineer Williams caught on first. The command ship's transmission. If we can modify it. Exactly, Morrison nodded. Instead of sending override codes, we send conflicting orders. Make their ships receive contradictory commands from multiple sources. Over the next 2 hours, Morrison worked with Williams and Davis to reprogram the captured Korthax ship's computer. It was dangerous work. One mistake could alert the enemy to what they were doing. We need to make this look natural, Morrison explained as they modified the alien code. The orders have to seem legitimate, but they need to create confusion and conflict within their command structure. The plan was elegant in its simplicity. Using the captured ship's command codes, they would send orders to different parts of the Korthax fleet, telling them to attack each other. Ship Group Alpha would receive orders to attack Ship Group Beta for suspected treason. Ship Group Beta would get orders to defend themselves against Alpha's unprovoked assault. Will this actually work? Prince Zalthar asked as they prepared to transmit. Morrison looked at the tactical display showing hundreds of enemy ships regrouping for their final assault. In human military history, more armies have been defeated by confusion and poor communication than by superior firepower. The Korthax have never experienced internal conflict. They won't know how to handle it. The transmission began at exactly 0800 hours. The modified command codes went out to the entire Korthax fleet, each group receiving different versions of the same basic message. Other Korthax units had turned traitor and must be destroyed immediately. For the first few minutes, nothing happened. Then the first shots were fired. A Korthax destroyer opened fire on what it believed was a traitorous cruiser. The cruiser, following its own orders to defend against treacherous destroyers, fired back. Within minutes, both ships were calling for support from their respective battle groups. The confusion spread like wildfire through the enemy fleet. Ship commanders, receiving conflicting orders from what appeared to be legitimate command sources, began choosing sides based on old rivalries and unit loyalties. Sir, Davis reported with amazement, over 400 enemy ships are now fighting each other. Their fleet is splitting into 3 separate factions. Morrison watched the tactical display as the Korthax fleet tore itself apart. Ships that had been preparing to attack the planet were now firing on their former allies. The coordination that had made them so dangerous was gone, replaced by chaos and mistrust. Now, Morrison ordered, launch all our remaining ships. Hit them while they're confused. The final battle lasted only 3 hours. The remaining Zephyrian fleet struck the divided Korthax forces like a sword through silk. Enemy ships, already damaged from fighting each other, fell quickly to coordinated attacks. When it was over, less than 50 Korthax vessels remained, and they were fleeing the system as fast as their engines could carry them. Empress Lyralai stood beside Morrison on the palace balcony, watching the last enemy ships disappear into hyperspace. The orbital fires were dying out, and for the first time in years the sky was clear. Is it really over? She asked quietly. Morrison nodded. The Korthax Collective will recover eventually, but it will take them decades to rebuild their fleet. By then you'll be ready for them. And you, Commander? Will you stay to help us prepare? Morrison looked out at the stars, thinking of Earth and the family he had left behind. For a while. Long enough to make sure you can defend yourselves, but my real job is done. Prince Zalthar joined them on the balcony. What was your job exactly? Morrison smiled. Your aunt asked for an army. Instead, she got something better. She got teachers. We taught you that strength isn't about having the biggest fleet or the most powerful weapons. It's about adapting, learning, and never giving up. As the 3 of them watched the peaceful stars, Morrison reflected on what they had accomplished. The Zephyrian Empire would survive, but more importantly, it would change. The rigid traditions that had nearly destroyed them would give way to flexible thinking and creative problem-solving. The alien Empress had asked for an army, but she had received something far more valuable, a new way of thinking that would protect her people long after the human strategist returned home.